Hello, everyone. First and foremost, allow me to wish you all a happy International Youth Day. My name is Samantha Savarese, and I'm an Associate Social Affairs Officer in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs Division for Inclusive Social Development. I'm thrilled to be here today for the official commemoration of International Youth Day 2022 under the theme Intergenerational Solidarity, Creating a World for All Ages. This year's theme aims to raise awareness of ageism and how ageism continues to lead to the disempowerment of both young and old. Even though we often think of ageism as an issue affecting older people, it's increasingly recognized that ageism also affects young people in significant ways that must be addressed. At the same time, this year's theme highlights the importance of intergenerational approaches in ensuring all voices are recognized and meaningfully engaged in advancing the 2030 agenda. Especially as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, combating ageism in its many forms and working together across all groups is key to advancing the SDGs. During today's webinar, organized together with the Major Group for Children and Youth, our goal is to better understand ageism, how it intersects with other forms of bias, and its negative impacts on both an individual and societal level. We will start off with a brief presentation by the World Health Organization, which will cover key findings of the Global Report on Ageism published last year and help set the stage for our two intergenerational discussions today. Panel 1 will explore how ageism manifests in different spheres of our lives, as well as how it can interact with other isms, such as racism and sexism, to multiply disadvantages. Indeed, we know that those at the intersection of multiple vulnerable groups are most at risk of being left behind. Following these personal testimonials and perspectives, Panel 2 will explore solutions and discuss more specifically how we can combat ageism and build intergenerational solidarity. Between each of these segments, there will also be a video presentation showcasing real-world examples of those working in these intergenerational spaces. These case studies include projects from Brazil, Uganda, and Spain. We hope you will enjoy today's webinar as we work to bring more awareness to these important topics and build a more inclusive, equitable, and just world for all ages. I now welcome Alana Officer, Unit Head of Demographic Change and Healthy Aging at the World Health Organization, who will give us a brief overview of the Global Report on Ageism. Once again, happy International Youth Day, and thank you so much for tuning in.
Samantha, thank you very much for the introduction. I am really thrilled to be here to celebrate the International Youth Day 2022 and to present the findings of the UN Global Report on Ageism. Have any of you ever felt or been told that you are too young or too old to be or to do something? Age is one of the first characteristics, along with gender and race, that we tend to notice about other people when we interact with them. It is also one of the main aspects on which we categorize people. Ageism is the stereotypes, so how we think, prejudice, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act towards others, but also towards ourselves based on age. We are not born ageist, but it does start early and it is reinforced over time. Children as young as 4 years of age are aware of their culture's age stereotypes through the storybooks that are read to them, media, and family culture. And these stereotypes tend to be internalized and they're used to guide our feelings and our behavior towards people of different ages, as well as towards ourselves. And ageism exists in all aspects of our society. But it tends to take on quite different forms across the life course. For example, thinking that older people are out of touch, less productive, a burden on society, are examples of ageist stereotypes that discount, in fact, the many contributions that older people make. being fearful when you see a group of younger people, or making offensive generalizations about a specific generation, such as millennials are all entitled, are ageist prejudice. Refusing to hire people of a certain age, failing to give them training, or being forced to retire at a certain age is discrimination. Not providing healthcare solely on the basis of age is also discriminatory. Disregarding someone's concerns or wishes due to their age, or using someone's age as justification to undermine, deceive, or control them are all examples of ageism. The UN Global Report on Ageism found that ageism is in fact everywhere. 1 in 2 people, or half of the world's population, have moderate or highly ageist attitudes against older people, with rates, surprisingly, much higher in lower income countries. The evidence in the report indicates that you're more likely to be ageist against older people if you're younger, if you're male, if you're fearful of death, and if you're less educated. You are more likely to experience ageism if you're older, if you're care dependent, you live in a country that's got a lower healthy life expectancy, or you tend to work in certain sectors such as tech or hospitality. For younger people, we unfortunately have much more limited data. In Europe, which is the only region for which data is available on all age groups, older and younger people in Europe report the highest rates of experienced ageism among all age groups in Europe, while younger people report more age discrimination than any other age group. Being young and being female means you're much more likely to be a target of ageism. You may ask, so ageism is incredibly prevalent. Is it that harmful? The answer to that is yes. Ageism is harmful and it's costly. Ageism is associated with earlier death, with poorer physical and mental health, including the onset of depression, social isolation and loneliness, taking more risks with your health, such as unhealthy diet, drinking excessively or smoking, but also poorer quality of life. But ageism doesn't only affect us as individuals. Ageism devalues or limits our ability to benefit from both what younger and older populations can contribute. It also tends to erode solidarity between generations. And ageism has really serious economic consequences for individuals and for society, and costs our society billions of dollars. Ageism is harmful, but it also exacerbates other forms of disadvantage related to sex, disability, and race. But the overarching message of the report is incredibly positive. It's very optimistic. We can combat ageism. The evidence suggests that there are 3 strategies that work: policy and law, educational activities, and intergenerational contact interventions. Policy and law is effective at addressing discrimination and inequality on the basis of age and can protect the human rights of everyone, everywhere, at all ages. Educational activities are great because they can enhance empathy, they can dispel misconceptions about different age groups, and hence reduce the prejudice by providing more accurate information and counter stereotypical examples. They can be included in all types and all levels of education. Intergenerational interventions, which tend to bring people together of different generations, can really help reduce intergroup prejudice and stereotypes. These are amongst the most effective interventions to reduce ageism against older people, and they show promise for also reducing ageism against younger people. Where possible, we really need to implement these 3 strategies together to maximize the impact. So, in summary, there are 3 main recommendations. We can and all must do something to reduce ageism. We need to implement and scale those 3 evidence-based strategies that prevent and tackle ageism: policy and law, education, and intergenerational contact interventions. We need to improve our data and research to gain a much better understanding of ageism against both older and younger people, and particularly in low and middle income countries. And we need to collectively change the narrative to create much more positive and more accurate narratives around age and aging. We know that culture is incredibly fluid. Look at the change that women have experienced in the past decades. So, to conclude, and then ageism affects us all. Ageism is absolutely everywhere. Ageism is incredibly harmful and has serious impacts on health, well-being, and our economies. But ageism can be combated, and we all have a role to play in challenging and eliminating it. Now, I wanted to, if you want more information about the report, you can have access to the full report in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Korean. There are executive summaries available in all UN languages and in Korean as well. And the Global Campaign to Combat Ageism Toolkit has guides on how do you initiate a conversation about ageism, as well as how to plan events and a range of social media assets and films that are available for your use. So thank you very much for listening today. And I wish you a wonderful International Youth Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alana, for that excellent presentation and for providing us with such a useful framework for the rest of today's discussions. We will now look at our first case study, International Youth Watch, based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This organization works intergenerationally with national and international institutions to support youth from marginalized communities and advance the Sustainable Development Goals.
What a time travel when we start thinking about 2012. And I remember the excitement we had here in Brazil, in addition to Rio Plus 20, which was the consequence of ECO 92, the summit of peoples, right? And it was a very special moment for our city. We were about to face a major political and economic crisis that we didn't know, and we were committed to a more sustainable, more inclusive nation ruled by a woman. Everyone was very excited to have Brazil coordinating a conversation about what would become the 2030 agenda, plus our future that we want. And then we went, myself and a series of friends and professors and colleagues, to the discussion poles both in Rio South Zone and in Rio Centro to debate the future that we want. And there I met delegations from all 193 countries. Being there in that space, I felt part of something bigger. I felt part of a commitment to my future, to the future of my generation, and soon after, we see the 2030 agenda emerge in 2015. And then I said, now I can do more, because now I know more than I knew before, and so I created the International Youth Watch. The International Youth Watch appears at this very moment as an effort to collaborate so that no young person is left behind in the midst of these processes of building the future that we want. Today, we face a triple crisis: the climate crisis, the loss of biodiversity, and the excess of solid waste in the world. Currently, it is in this scope that we believe that the intergenerational work becomes more evident. We don't have any time to waste. And the truth is that these debates started long before any of our members were born. Therefore, let us build together with the experience of those who have built and have been building for many years, and also help to bring in more people who will still be able to build with the current generation and with the next ones. The International Youth Watch then works by carrying out a series of projects aimed at precisely that, to get experienced people with resources willing to teach and pass this knowledge on to young people committed to starting to make a difference in a more impactful way. Because growing up in a favela made me understand and relate to the anger and frustration that we have of looking around and seeing so many violations of rights. One of our main projects is Favela Lab, in which we invite our renowned experts in the areas of politics and citizenship, activism, sustainability, among other things, and offer classes for young people from the periphery who want to be leaders for sustainable development in their communities. Favela Lab is a platform where youth from the favelas and the periphery can engage in the 2030 agenda through some things that are more central to our generation, technology and audiovisual. And that's why we thought about how to bring a power that is in the palm of our hands, like a cell phone, to the center of an agenda as far from our lives as the 2030 agenda. The most interesting part of what the participants of the program show is how the problems we have today already affected parents, grandparents, people who lived before them in their territories. I've lived in this house, here in this place, for about 12 years, and there are people who have lived for 30 years, and it's the same thing. My God, tell her, thank you for the 77 years you have lived to get here. When she says the following, she's right. Tanyamara, we have to leave it to this youth now. They're the ones who have to take care of it. How long have you been getting water from the faucet, and how many times a week do you go there? I have lived here for 12 years, so I've been getting water from the faucet for 12 years. And depending on it, twice, 3 times a week, you know. What is the quality of the water of the faucet? It is kind of good. You can drink it, understand? I have nothing to say about it. It is the only one that is still saving us now. I came after my mother and grandmother who live here. My mother didn't raise me. She left me with my father. So when I grew up a little bit, I wanted to meet my mother. The first house I had was here in Beco 1, in the invasion of the Beco 1. That was the first one. I set up a booth. I used to put it like this. My bedding was the wall of the shack. The floor, if you looked at it like this, was full of rain, so cold, so wet, with my 3 children. So, the way the International Youth Watch develops intergenerational work is by creating objective spaces for dialogue between different generations of activists, leaders, and people who work for the transformation of their realities in some way. A major challenge is the fact that cross-generational work is a two-way street. It depends on the assiduous commitment of all involved to make it work. We cannot reach a sustainable, equitable, and developed future without everyone's commitment. Beyond that, dealing with the young people from peripheral territories involves a series of needs to correct social inequalities. I think we face a lot of stigma as intersectional youth from the periphery about our itinerary, about our being, what we do, right? We are seen as victims, as part of criminality or marginalized dynamics. And the internet has this potential for us to reach, right? Reach the world with our storytelling, made by favela youth for youth around the world. Our institutional partnership during this time, such as the UN, Peripheral Connection, Institute Climate and Society, the City Hall from Rio de Janeiro, Ford Foundation, the German Consulate, Estácio de Sá University, Institute Edux, among others, were able to guarantee that many of our young people had access to professional development opportunities, pursued higher education, received attention to their artistic and cultural work. We are sure that the way to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals is intergenerational work and solidarity. We are the International Youth Watch, and we will work tirelessly for that.
We hope you enjoyed that interesting case study. It's inspiring to see a real-world example of this type of intergenerational work being done. Now we'll move on to our first panel discussion titled Understanding and Addressing Ageism, which will be moderated by Ms. Romeral Ortiz, a youth and peace-building specialist from Spain. Romeral, over to you.
Thank you, Samantha, and hello everyone, and happy International Youth Day. I am Romeral Ortiz, and I will be your moderators for today's panel discussion on the topic of understanding and addressing ageism. So as mentioned, my name is Romeral, and I'm currently working as an international consultant on youth peace and security for different UN entities, and I count with over 10 years of experience in the field of meaningful youth engagement. So as outlined in the presentation by WHO, ageism is a significant societal issue and public health concern with negative impacts on both young and old population. Yet we often do not discuss ageism or consider its effects. To better understand how ageism affects individuals of all ages and undermines the progress towards the SDGs, we have convened a diverse panel today. They will share their own views and experience with ageism. So let us first meet our panelists. To start, I will give the floor to Ms. Lani Anaya so that she can introduce herself. Then we'll go to Mr. Rafiu Lawal and Dr. Sandra Timmerman to do the same. So Lani, thank you for being with us, and over to you.
Hi, Romero, very nice to see you, and also happy International Youth Day. My name is Lani. I'm really happy to be in this panel. I am a Mexican practice-based research expert in peace and development, and I have done consultancies for local, national, regional, and some international projects, especially related to youth inclusion in peace building, some ecumenical work and interreligious work in the 2030 Agenda. And I have implemented youth peace and security research and trainings in some countries, mainly Mexico, the Latin American region. And currently I'm one of the youngest organizing partners for the UN NGO Major Group. That has these conversations with the UN on the 2030 Agenda. This is on behalf of the organization Marble Mexico. I have my educational background is international relations, peace and conflict, and ecumenical studies. Thank you. Over to you, Romero.
Thank you so much, Lani, and welcome again. Over to you, Rafiu.
All right, thanks, Romero. My name is Rafiu Lawal. I'm the Executive Director of Building Blocks for Peace Foundation. Building Blocks for Peace Foundation is a youth-led non-governmental organization working on conflict prevention and peace building in Nigeria. We are basically mobilizing young people for peace and also empowering them to take peace initiatives across communities in Nigeria. Building Blocks of Peace Foundation is working with victims of extremism and also violent offenders in Nigeria. We're providing rehabilitation and reintegration initiatives to ensure that these individuals can also return back to the society and become meaningful agents of peace. I think that I'm very delighted to be part of this conversation today on ageism. And I feel that there is no better time other than today, which is International Youth Day, to discuss this subject matter. Given the, various manifestation of violence of exclusion that you see in Nigeria and Africa, and the various exclusionary tendencies that you see, especially the ones affecting young people, I feel that the discussion today is very apt, and I'm so delighted that I'm part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Rafiu. We are also delighted to have you. And now over to Dr. Sandra Timmerman for her introduction.
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for inviting me. I think it's a real privilege to be part of the International Youth Assembly, and I'm so pleased you included older people in the discussion, and especially me, because I truly believe that we need to get out of our age silos and bring younger and older people together to combat ageism and to work hand in hand to solve global problems. So as you'll see from the bio, I'm a representative to the UN for the International Federation on Aging, and I'm also secretary of the Global NGO Executive Committee and program co-chair of the NGO Committee on Aging. I retired from my main career, and I've now shifted my focus to try to make a contribution to global policy. It's been an interesting life journey for me because I'm a gerontologist. That's somebody who studies, works, and advocates in the field of aging. And now I'm older myself, so I'm not just studying about aging. I'm experiencing ageism personally as well as professionally. And if I have just a minute, I broke my wrist a while ago. And when I went to the emergency room, the doctor directed all his questions about my condition to my stepson, not to me. And that made me so angry. So I told the doctor that I fell on my wrist, not on my head, and to please talk to me directly. And so when ageism strikes, whether we're young or old, we need to do more calling out. So today, I think we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we can do, both as older people and younger people, to work together for the rights of all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Timmerman, and also by starting with a very strong examples. I'm sure this conversation is going to be very exciting and very insightful. So thank you to the three of you for being here today. And now I suggest that we can dig deeper into ageism to understand its nature, determinants, and manifestation in the many different spheres of our lives. So Sandra, you mentioned it, but I'm going to repeat it. You are representative of the United Nations for the International Federation on Aging. So you must have quite unique insight in how ageism can manifest in government action and legislation, as well as how societal attitudes and stigmas can influence policymaking. Could you please tell us a little bit more about this? Over to you.
Yes, I'm so happy to do that because we have a real issue here. I've been asked by you, of course, to share my experience about this in our policy and advocacy work. And I've been very active in being involved in the advocacy for a convention, which is a legally binding document to protect the human rights of older persons and ensure that ageism does not persist into older ages. And, you know, despite population aging, which is the process where older people account for a proportionately larger share of the total population, we really have a difficult time calling attention to their special circumstances and their loss of rights. And, you know, I'll just give you one example. We know that there are just too many incidents of violence and abuse against women and girls, but it's really a double whammy for older women: ageism plus sexism. And even though older people are victims too, we've been finding that they're too often forgotten about in discussions and in policymaking. And older people are adversely affected in so many areas covered by the SDGs: climate change, poverty, migration, to name a few. And ageism is one reason we don't hear much about the impact on older persons. Think of the war in Ukraine. Many older persons have been left behind, and what's going to happen to them? Interestingly, the pandemic had disproportionate effects on older people. Was it because of ageism that they were most likely to remain untreated and left to die? But in a strange way, we found as we were advocating that the pandemic helped us call attention to the health disparities of older people. And a positive outcome of such a devastating situation was that the UN Secretary General recognized the crisis and issued a policy brief on the impact of COVID on older persons. I think that's a really important step forward. Before I close, I just want to point out that older people are not only victims, and they are not only the ones who need protection, they're also an incredible resource. They bring value, they bring human capital to their communities and to society. And when you think about it, they're the caregivers, they're the workers, they're the volunteers, and they are the unsung heroes. And we really believe, as we advocate, that they're an untapped resource and that they have a right to learn, to work, and to contribute, just like everybody else. So in our work, we take a life course approach so that no one, regardless of age, is left behind. And I think we score victory when we talk about rights of people of all ages. And we also believe that youth has something at stake in joining our efforts, because you all have parents and grandparents, and you will be old someday and will want to live in a society where people of all ages have equal rights and equal opportunities, so you can carve out your own future. And also, I just want to say, I'm in particular fond of the idea of joining with you in your efforts, because we understand that you face ageism too. And actually, I'm in awe of your generation. So my message would be, let's work together to make things happen for all of us.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for those insightful comments and also for highlighting the impact that ageism has on older generation and also the intersection that you were also bringing our attention to. So thank you so much for that. Now I would like to go to Rafiu and ask you that in line with the 2022 ECOSOC Youth Forum's theme, Building Back Better from COVID-19 while advancing the full implementation of 2030 agenda, if you could please share with us and in your experience how ageism affected young people in Nigeria during the pandemic, and in particular, how did ageist attitudes shape policies and government action or inaction? Thank you in advance, Rafiu.
Okay, I will quickly follow up with the example that Sandra mentioned. I remember sometimes last year, I was at a stakeholders meeting, meeting of stakeholders working on peace and security in Nigeria. And after the meeting, I was about going, and one of the participants called me and said, "Which organization did you say you work with again?" And I said, Building Blocks for Peace Foundation, and I am the executive director. And he said, "Are you sure? I hope you're not here to impersonate your director." I was like, "No, I am the executive director." It was like, "Oh, that organization has been doing wonderful things, and we expect that the executive director should be, maybe somebody with a PhD or somebody very old." I said, "Well, I'm the executive director." So that is just by the side. I think that it is no longer news that majority of those who suffered greatly during the COVID pandemic, especially in Nigeria and Africa, are basically young people. And I'm going to give you some kind of examples to justify that. Number one, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a lot of attacks on human rights. We saw a lot of securitization, especially around and of young people. The federal government of Nigeria announced a national lockdowns without, keenly looking into the consequences of these lockdowns on young people. Young people responded because you ordered a lockdown. There was no economic stimulus for them. There was no intervention whatsoever. And to some extent, some of them resisted the lockdowns and eventually became a confrontation between the government and the government security agencies and young people. We saw some kind of neglect, especially in terms of accessing health facilities during the lockdown on the part of young people. During that pandemic, there was this perception that young people were somehow immune to the virus, and that those who needed concentration, those who needed attention as at that time were children, and of course, the elderly, because there was this assumption that the elderly have weaker immune system. And shockingly, we had records that a lot of young people also died during the COVID-19 pandemic as a result of the fact that they couldn't access health facilities as at that time. I already spoke about some of the neglect in terms of provision of economic stimulus. Majority of the livelihood support that we saw during that time focused largely on the elderly, on women, on children, with total neglect for young people. And the assumption was that, they could survive on their own. And that was also one of the reasons why young people revolted in what is popularly known as the NSAS movement in Nigeria. As a result of the COVID pandemic again, we have also seen some kind of skyrocketing, especially in terms of the level of unemployment among the youth population in Nigeria. And I'm going to give you statistics for this. Between the fourth quarter of 2022, the youth unemployment rate in Nigeria jumped to 53%, as against 40% in the second quarter of 2022. So as a result of the pandemic, majority of young people in Nigeria now are unemployed and finding it difficult to access source of livelihood. In terms of jobs, again, there is an ongoing trend in Nigeria now, especially among government, among private corporations, and other entities, as it were, in terms of assessing job opportunities. For anyone to be able to assess meaningful job opportunity, especially at entry level now, they say that you must not be above 25. Once you are above 25, it's difficult for you to assess a meaningful job opportunity. So, and again, for a young person who is in a university, most times before you run through your programs, your 4-year programs, you're already 27. And the system wants to employ people who are 25 or less. So what's going to happen to people who are 27, 28, 29, thereabouts? So in terms of response to youth views and opinions, again, I think that we also see a clear manifestation of ageism in this category. There is an adage in Nigeria that says that what an elder will see while sitting down, a young man will not see it, even when standing up. Even when climbing on a ladder, a young person will not see. And this literally means that the elderly, because of the number of years they've spent on earth, they have more experience, they have more knowledge on things better than young people. And to a very large extent, young people's ideas, young people's opinions, young people's perspective on certain issues of national importance are being neglected, because they think that they are young, they don't have enough experience, they don't have enough knowledge of how things run. And we have evidence to show that, this is not usually the case. Young people have been offering meaningful advice, meaningful opinions, and you see that in all the manifestation of their work. So if you ask me, in summary, I would say that in terms of government responses, especially in the management of COVID-19 pandemic, has been largely, we have seen that it was not youth sensitive in all ramifications. It was not youth sensitive at all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafiu, for those perspective and also for highlighting the negative impact that policies can have when we have decision made on stereotypes, especially in your example based on the stereotypes we have on young people. So thank you for highlighting that. So Lani, now to you, if you could please talk to us about how ageism has affected your work and aspiration as a young peace builders in Mexico. And if you did see how did you see, ageism interact with other ism, like sexism or racism in those spaces, and what were the outcomes? Thank you, and over to you, Lani.
Thank you, Romeral, and also, thank you, Sandra and Rafiu, for also allowing us to hear from your perspectives how is ageism impacting. I think in Latin America and Mexico, there is a big situation about ageism, particularly to young people, that we even have our own term that it's called adultocentrismo, or that it's a reference to the supremacy of adults over children and over youth. So talking about that, I remember, and I want to share a personal experience. During my first job after my graduation in international relations, I was working at the parliament in Mexico, and it was not only me, but other colleagues the same age and the same educational background. We were taken out of the margins when it was when we had to do decision-making processes in my job, because people thought that because we're young, we don't have that's equal to not having experience. So even we had the same educational degrees as non-youth, or exchanges or internships and so on, and the list can continue. It was very difficult to be part of that group deciding all the stages of the process. That's something that continues and remains in Latin America and in Mexico today, because we're portrayed as people with less capabilities. And then because we're not capable, that's equal to not being able to be part of the decision-making process. Another aspect of that is that not only we're not taking part of the process of decision making, but also sometimes our knowledge and capabilities are used as in an extractive way. And I experienced that recently. We did a project about youth peace and security with the government of Mexico, and we contributed with the knowledge we have as an organization, as persons, but we don't have the same payment as non-youth, or our organization, YPS organization, was not recognized as other agencies. So that's also what is happening with ageism. And about the interaction with other forms of violence, because I think that ageism is a kind of violence, structural violence, that it's also linked to sexism, classism, colonialism, in some cases, racism, heterosexism, ethnocentrism, and we can also continue with the list. But these kind of interactions of structural forms of violence can be presented in very subtle ways, even how we will use our language. How are we using symbols? How are we saying a narrative? It goes from these forms of subtle violence to the reflection in domination and oppression and direct violence to young people and to older people. In Mexico, one example I can relate to has been gender violence. In workplaces, it's very common that male superiors who are non-young people are harassing women. And it's a kind of structural violence that has to do with our gender. Also, if we are not white people, we are a mixed race or indigenous population, that sexual harassment can even be multiplied in other forms, or not being from a certain socioeconomic class. So that's why, as we talk of these different forms and how ageism is interacting, I think that's why nowadays we talk a lot about intersectionality. And maybe some people might think, well, why are we talking so much about this? But as we see the different forms of violence, we need to use this intersectionality and to see all these violences as cross-cutting. Because if we use this, and also we cope this with intergenerational approaches, then we can be able to address the multiple violences and dimensions in order to address inequalities. And as the 23rd agenda says, that we leave no one behind, no one age, like from any age, we have to ensure that we leave no one behind from development and from participation and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Lani. And also, I mean, to the three of you who brought like personal example, again, very illustrative. I also like how you say that we need to unpack these agents to actually discover the different layers of discrimination so that we can really address it properly. So thank you, Lani, for that. And now I would like to invite you, the three of you, to share any quick reaction you might have from what you just heard. So anyone who would like to take the floor, please feel free to unmute. I think, Sandra, your mic is muted.
So I'll start. And I thought both of your examples were really interesting, because sometimes when you're in my position, you don't see ageism quite the same way, but your concerns are very important to take into consideration. And I just want to say there's something common about concerns that we have in the workplace, because I discovered that once I stopped working and didn't have a business card, I had nothing to talk about when I went to meetings. And so people would ignore me. I was no longer in the action. I know our governments are often controlled by older people, but I think in the workplace, older people are supposed to be, productive. And if they're not, what are they? They're a burden to society. So I had a business card made, and it said, CEO of Aging and Business Consulting. And then people regarded me. But if I said to someone, I'm retired, they said, well, it's nice to meet you, goodbye. So we want to be included in the action too. And I think we do have something in common. We have a bridge.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Yes, indeed. I think it might resonate to Lani and Rafiu as well. I don't know if any of you would like to comment anything.
Well, I think one thing stood out for me when Lani was making her presentation, and I think she spoke about the question of intergenerational approach. For me, I think that one of the ways that we can address this issue is to begin to promote the concept of shared equity so that everybody will be treated as equal and opportunities will be available for all.
Thank you, Rafiu. Thank you for that. Lani, do you have any comment, or we are good?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was also, I could relate to both of you, Rafiu and Sandra. When you talk about COVID, I can relate a lot with my grandparents, because my grandparents used to be very active. Even they are retired, that doesn't mean that they are not like doing anything. And they were really active before the pandemic. And now with the pandemic and the lockdowns, that has been affecting them so much in their mental health and the physical health. And I think this is an opportunity, as this International Youth Day is talking about intergenerational approaches, then to bring our common ground together. I think that's very important, and that we learn from each other. And also with Rafiu and your experience saying that you are a CEO and someone, maybe a person don't believe that you have certain experience. And I think that's some barriers. That's why I don't like to talk about intergenerational work, but approach, because I think work limits the scope so much. But if we are addressing this intergenerational way to do things, then a lot of barriers and stereotypes about each other should be overcome. I think that's one of, we talk about otherness and conflict between countries, between different parties, but sometimes I think we have conflicts between generations, and we create stereotypes and feelings about the other generations that if we really come to the table with an openness to think and to hear actively each other, that could begin creating a lot of transformation for inclusion.
Thank you, Lani. And I think this space, it's, at least to me, a very good example now of how we are starting this intergenerational dialogue discussion and really understanding the same concerns and see how do we move forward together in combating ageism. So thank you for that. And thank you to everyone. So now we are going towards the end of our panel, but before, I would like to ask you, so after hearing each other's responses and testimonial, if I could pose your final question, what does a world without ageism look like to you? And first, I would like to ask this to Dr. Sandra Timmerman.
So thanks for starting with me, because I have so many things to say, but I know you all do as well. And it's a world I want to live in, a world without ageism, sexism, gender bias. We really need to carve that world out. I have a few things I wrote down. Looking in my crystal ball, maybe I'm not going to be around for them, but you might, if you can carve it out and help us get there. I thought respect for each other with no generational warfare or discrimination about anybody's age. I think we do have a tendency to stereotype each other, and that's not a good world to live in. I think after hearing you, we ought to have governments and communities with full participation of all people. Older people have wisdom, not all of them, but we hope we do. But younger people have new ideas, have energy, have studied. They also have an important part to play. And if we can find a way to have all of us participate without one group dominating the other, that would be great. And I think that the world has to be a better place when there are human rights for all of us, so nobody's left behind. And the way that we can get started is to think about really having dialogues like this, maybe in small groups, because we need to be honest with each other and yet be open-minded, as both of you have said. So I could go on, but I know we have other wonderful things to hear. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Over to you, Rafi. We would like to hear from you.
Well, I think for me, a world without ageism would be a world where individuals are recognized as humans and treated as humans, not based on their ages. A world where all relevant stakeholders, would concretely implement policies affecting young people. The reality is that we have a lot of policies addressing ageism, a lot of policies that are youth-centric, but commitment, especially in Nigeria and Africa, has been a very difficult thing in recent times. So I hope that, there's going to be some kind of renewed commitment to addressing issues that affect young people, that affect the elderly, that affect children, and every other person living on the face of the earth. Then lastly, I think that we cannot but continue to emphasize the need for awareness, the need for education and meaningful engagement around the subject of ageism, because it's something that will affect, that will be a will, even in the progress of humanity, if it's not properly addressed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafi, for those words. And Lani, how do you see this world without ageism?
Well, I see this world without ageism as a world that takes seriously all the voices from children voices, young people, and non-youth, and older people. Like any kind of voice can be heard and taken seriously, and taken seriously enough to move together. I also see this world as a non-tokenistic world, because I think we can relate also sometimes in certain activities or events, young people or non-young people are taken to the tables to talk, but it's only because we want to have a picture, or we want just to say that we include them, but that's not meaningful. So I see that world that is intergenerational by not doing this tokenistic approach. And also, as Sandra was mentioning, I think this world can begin transforming as the world we imagine by doing local work. Talking within our families, between generations, hearing each other, learning about our past and our present and our future, being inclusive in our community boards and the political factions that are local, and the school councils and community leadership. I think those can be the first steps that we can take to make this happen.
Thank you so much, Lani, but thank you to the three of you for very inspirational words. I really mean it. I feel very refreshed, very inspired, very hopeful as well. So thank you so much for being part of today's very rich discussion. And I was taking some notes, and I wanted to highlight a few of the takeaways I personally taking. One is this recognition now that from both younger and older generation, there is common challenges and obstacles. There is usually from society this attitude or understanding that maybe those generations are not capable enough, or they cannot contribute, or they are victim, as we were hearing at the beginning of the conversation. But then how can we work together to have this very meaningful participation from all voices, as Lani was mentioning? That's something really, how can we move away from this decoration tokenistic approach to really meaningful participation from the different generation. Then another takeaway I took from Rafi in particular was like, how can we debunk all these myths and stereotypes that we have from the different generation, and the importance and necessity to have data to really back up the policy that is based on evidence? Because I could hear from you that it's from your personal examples, but what we see in general in the work we are doing, that a lot is actually based on stereotypes. No? So how can we really build that data and evidence, especially for policy making? And then finally, the question of intersectionality. I think we would not advance properly in leaving no one behind if we do not have that lens of intersectionality when it comes to combating ageism. So those would be my main takeaways. There were many others, but thank you so much to the three of you again, to everyone. And I would like to give back the floor to Samantha. Thank you.
Thank you, Romeral, and thank you to all our panelists for that rich and informative discussion and for giving us insight into how ageism can manifest in different spheres of our lives and present a real barrier to inclusive and sustainable development. Now we will look at our next case study, which comes from the University of Leeds in the UK and takes place in Uganda. This case study marries the local community-based theatre tradition and arts with an intergenerational approach to foster dialogue across generations on a number of important social issues.
I am Dr. Katie McQuaid, an anthropologist and UKRI Future Leaders Fellow at the University of Leeds in the UK. And we've been doing intergenerational research in Uganda over the past 7 years. Urban communities in Uganda and Indonesia, where I work, are facing the intersecting impacts of key global challenges, including a cost of living crisis, youth unemployment, COVID-19, gender-based violence, and climate shocks and variability. Our research has been exploring how impacts of these challenges are exacerbated among those already marginalized by social norms and intersecting social hierarchies, particularly gender and generational. And we've long focused on the injustices arising from the ongoing marginalization of girls and women through the life course. A widening intergenerational gap is making it ever more difficult to tackle these issues, driving a lack of trust and communication between generations, an increasingly marginalized older generation, particularly in cities, and youth feeling dispossessed and excluded from politics and policy, as well as a fraying of traditional intergenerational caring relations. A holistic approach that embraces all generations, fostering meaningful, sustained, and equitable intergenerational dialogue and action is critical to the success of interventions if they're to leave no one behind. Over the past 7 years in Uganda, we've been combining arts and social sciences to create meaningful and sustainable intergenerational relations to address a full spectrum of social health and environmental issues. More presently, in 2022, we're developing an intergenerational model for building climate resilience among some of the most vulnerable urban populations. Attention to intergenerational dynamics is critical. For example, we've found efforts to improve educational and health outcomes for adolescent girls will struggle if the work is not intergenerational, encompassing and reaching out to parents and caregivers, to teachers and school governance, to police officers, cultural and religious leaders, or indeed local chiefs and administrators, but also reaching out to their male peers. The social norms that mediate girls' access to education or forced early marriage are practiced and reinforced intergenerationally, and without fostering intergenerational practice, are unlikely to be transformed. We've focused on building intergenerational solidarity through action research since 2015. In collaboration with local researchers, artists, schools, and civil society organisations, our research has demonstrated how participatory and creative methods, including theatre, dance, poetry, and participatory film and photography, have the potential to bring marginalised communities, adolescents, women, refugees and asylum seekers, older women, informal workers, into the centre of intergenerational responses to intersecting crises, and into direct dialogue with practitioners and policymakers. Creativity and arts-based methods have been central to our intergenerational praxis, creating sustained opportunities for meaningful engagement between generations and genders that fosters communication and knowledge, inclusive and equitable relations, and actions that directly serve the needs and interests identified by marginalised groups. Our projects work through two key phases. Phase 1 uses weekly arts-based and dialogue workshops to explore generational understandings of cultural and gendered impacts, experiences, and responses to key challenges. We work first in separate gender and generational groups, before later bringing participants together to share perspectives and build social consensus across social divides, breaking down the traditional power of the patriarchal voice. In one project, which you can see now, we worked with over 60 community participants aged from 14 to over 60, meeting weekly over the course of a year and using arts to explore concepts of sustainability and intergenerational and social justice. In other instances, we've worked with participants for 3 months. Workshops use creative tools such as applied theatre to provide multiple ways in which participants can explore and discuss and debate key issues from different viewpoints while building trust and fostering a safe, inclusive space. We adopt a Freirean model whereby we initiate reflexive cycles in which creative activities stimulate discussions that lead to new creative expressions and reflections and so on. Using arts helps to build inclusivity, including the perspectives of those who feel unable or lack confidence to contribute to discussion. It also allows difficult issues to be embodied and explored without having to put them into words. Creative tools do not just provide ways to discuss problems, but to reimagine futures and discuss and put into practice hopeful solutions and interventions, as well as trying out and experimenting new ways of relating to each other on a more equitable basis, breaking down traditional barriers as to who can speak and lead. They're designed to be transformative, building communication and confidence skills, and building social cohesion and solidarity across generational and gender divides to drive social transformation and behaviour change. In one example, we ran workshops where young people gave breakdance performances about climate change and dystopian environmental futures to older people in order to foster intergenerational dialogue and solutions. It was not only successful in highlighting local environmental issues or developing new community responses, but also challenging discriminatory attitudes towards youth and youth culture and dismissive attitudes towards elders. We've also provided training in community-based participatory research methods and ethics to participants to lead in conducting peer-to-peer intergenerational research. Youth interviewed elders and vice versa. The data was collaboratively analysed by both generations, and knowledge from older interviewees was then transcribed into a verbatim poem performed by a young man in a hip-hop style for a mixed group of communities and stakeholders, who then came to the round tables together to draw up recommendations for more effective and equitable environmental programmes. An added impact of this was the fostering of new intergenerational understandings of what it was like to walk in the other's shoes. Phase 2 then uses learning to draw on and invite different expertise, bringing public health workers, gender-based violence experts and organisations or sustainable energy providers to empower intergenerational teams to work together across age and gender to share and develop mutual knowledge and skills, shaping new strategies relevant to, endorsed and communicated by participant groups. We also invite leading practitioners in art, film, research, poetry, theatre, music and dance to provide training and work in collaboration with participants to create outputs and tools that have enabled them to upscale and cascade the learning they've found most valuable with their wider communities and policymakers and practitioners. For example, I Just Wanted to Ask was a 6-part radio play series written for and performed on a local Lusoga language radio station with attached phone-in programs, directly addressing the negative health outcomes caused by poor intergenerational communication. The impacts have been diverse and wide-ranging as learning has been taken up in multiple ways. Our findings have been used to create packages of arts-based interactive learnings on the issues of gender equity and sexual and reproductive health for children aged 13 to 16. We've reached over 3,000 young people and put youth at the centre of conversations about reproductive health and structural inequalities. Teachers and public health officials have been trained to deliver more interactive, child-centred and arts-based teaching on these issues, as well as empowering girls to develop knowledge of and autonomy over their bodies. Wider school populations, parents and surrounding communities have benefited through direct access to the creative health education tools and opportunity to contribute to action-based focus group discussions. They've been encouraged and supported to explore new models of gendered and intergenerational relations with evidence that they've supported adolescents in embodying more equitable and safer practices. We've supported green energy projects, including a women's green briquette cooperative, used folk stories and giant puppets to convene intergenerational dialogue and action around community cleanups, which have then been supported by local councils who provided wheelbarrows, latex gloves and equipment. And we've used forum theatre as a tool for challenging high rates of gender-based violence in their communities. Impacts have included individual behaviour change and transformations in attitudes, for example, reduced intimate partner violence, increased school attendance and attainment, and improved child and parent relationships, as well as increased self-confidence and self-worth among our women participants. Upwards of 3,000 people have not just watched our performances, but have been involved in workshops, discussions, and radio call-ins discussing sexual and reproductive health, contraception, and gender equality. And our independent evaluations have repeatedly shown our work has notably improved respect and friendship between and across the gender and generational divides, empowered young people, and built bridges between generations, regardless of class and ethnicity. Our creative and person-centered participatory methodologies have been embraced by public health practitioners and in their trainings across the country and utilised in public health messaging for adolescents. At the end of 2015, our intergenerational participants formally registered as a community-based organisation and continue to partner with us and have recently supported a lot of our youth-centred work. In 2022, they've been presenting intergenerational interactive plays in 30 government primary schools as part of our ongoing projects that address health and gender equality among adolescents. More recently, under the Generate project I lead in Uganda and Indonesia, we're bringing different generations together through creative praxis to explore the diverse impacts of climate change on marginalised urban communities. We're developing new forms of creative intergenerational praxis to tackle climate challenges, including housing, transport, health, livelihoods, and gender inequality, actively building resilience to climate change and promoting the profile, participation, and leadership of some of the most vulnerable urban residents. As an elder involved in our research in 2016 put it, we've seen more times, tried more times, and heard more times. The two generations should work together to be an example to the coming one. We should be united.
We hope you enjoyed the second case study, which touched on some creative, research-based strategies and programs. Now we'll move on to our second panel discussion, From Ageism to Intergenerational Solidarity. The panel will be moderated by Ms. Batul Alwadani, a junior doctor from the NHS in Scotland and due diligence analyst with the WHO. Batul, over to you.
Thank you, Samantha. Hello, everyone, and happy International Day for everyone tuning in. A day in which we celebrate young people, in which we acknowledge their achievements and their contribution to the world, but at the same time, we discuss the challenges they face and we try to find ways to put an end for it. I'm very thrilled to be your moderator for today's panel's discussion on the topic From Ageism to Intergenerational Solidarity. My name is Batul, and any discussion that is related to young people is very dear to my heart because I'd like to call myself a youth advocate. I come from a background of volunteering with youth organizations. I was the previous president of the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, and currently very passionate about the young people's and older people's health as well, being a junior doctor in Scotland. We've heard already that ageism is not a youth nor an older person issue. It's an issue that is affecting people from all different ages, and therefore it requires all of us working together in synergy to address it. According to the Global Report on Ageism, there are 3 different evidence-based strategies to combat ageism: policy and law, educational activities, and intergenerational interventions. Although in today's panel, we will focus with a very specific taste on intergenerational approaches, but we can always keep in mind that those strategies actually work together. And one could always say that we can benefit from having an intergenerational lens and an inclusive approach to all of our issues. To continue our conversation today, as we promised you, we're going to have an intergenerational dialogue with people sharing their experiences from different ages. We have an intergenerational panel to share their thoughts on how we can combat ageism and build solidarity across all different ages. So let's all meet our panelists. To start with, I'll give the floor to Ms. Gabrielle Alves. And Gabrielle, you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how your work is related to ageism as well. And then we'll move to Mr. Norman Anwar and then Miss Ashton Applewhite to do the same. So Gabrielle, I'll give the floor to you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to virtually meet you all. My name is Gabrielle Alves. I speak from Brasília, Brazil. I am a political scientist, law student, and researcher at Plataforma Cipó. We are a women-led think tank focused on climate justice, peace, and governance. And our work is related to youth and intergenerational conversations because that's the principle of climate justice in general. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. Norman, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from my part of the world. I'm speaking from New Delhi in India, and my name is Norman Anwar. And I have worked variously as a political aid and policy researcher with members of parliament and members of legislative assemblies from various parts of my home country. A lot of the work has focused on generating employment and creating better access to health resources for communities on ground, which also includes young people, and also understanding educational outcomes and what kind of impact that has on young people finding representation in political structures.
Thank you, Norman. And Ashton, the floor is yours.
Hi. It's wonderful to be here on International Youth Day. Thank you for having me and for just, I feel like my presence here is testimony to the fact that ageism affects all ages and that we need to unify across the generations in order to combat it and end it. I am a Brooklyn-based writer and activist. And I think the United States is responsible for exporting a lot of really ageist popular culture and in the entertainment industry. So I'm doing my best to counteract it by writing, by blogging at thischairrocks.com, and putting out a lot of stuff on my website that is available for free to educate people about ageism and to dismantle it. And this is a struggle for all of us because everyone is getting older. Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you all. It's already very exciting and amazing to hear all of these different experiences, and we're very lucky to have all of those different backgrounds for us to have a meaningful discussion today in our panel on how we can combat ageism. So Ashton, coming back to you, and one of the best ways in which we can advocate for our opinions and address the challenges around us is by writing. And you had a book which is called The Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism, in which in a unique way you urges us to question the mainstream narrative around aging. Can you tell us how can we begin to dismantle those stereotypes around age, both at societal and individual level, in order to build intergenerational solidarity?
Delighted to talk about this favorite topic of mine. The first step, which is also the hardest, is to look at our own attitudes towards age and aging, because we are all ageist. We're all biased in all sorts of ways, and most bias is unconscious, and we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. And ageism is sort of the last major bias to percolate into the public consciousness. Nobody is born prejudiced, but it starts in early childhood, around the same time that attitudes towards race and gender begin to form, because negative messages about age and aging come at us, at least in the West, from the media and popular culture and advertising and billboards and movies all the time. And we older people have had a lifetime of absorbing these messages, and most of us have never thought to question them, so we can be the most ageist of all. And unless we push back, this becomes part of our identity, and that is internalized bias. The good news is that once you see it in yourself, it's like a spell breaking. You start to see it in the world around you, and you realize, oh, it's not a personal failing or problem. It's a political and social problem that we can come together and do something about in events like this one. And that is really liberating. Another thing we can do is to recognize that aging is not something annoying that old people do. It is a journey that we embark on the day we are born. Aging is living. To live is to age. And all prejudice relies on what sociologists call othering, seeing a group of people as other than ourselves. The weird thing about ageism is that the other is our own future older selves. But older people are not other. We are you. You will be us. And feeling alienated from us or apprehensive at becoming like us is not natural. It's not inevitable. It is the result of those larger forces, ageism, sexism, capitalism, that benefit when we are divided. And age has a lot less to do with whether people have things in common or like being together than we think it does. Class, gender, and race all shape affinity much more than age does. And the more time we spend in mixed age company, the more evident that fact becomes. So think about when you get to a party or any kind of gathering, do you head for people your own age? No judgment. We all do. But one thing you can do is try to break that habit. Simply making a much older or younger friend is an anti-ageist act. And another habit to try and break, use the word generation less, a lot less, because generational labels divide us and they feed age stereotypes. The minute you hear millennial or gen whatever, a whole bunch of associations click in place in your head unconsciously. So instead of using those labels, just describe people as older or younger. It's always accurate. It doesn't divide us, and it emphasizes that we age in relation to others, right? We're older in some contexts and younger in others, that we're all on this ride called aging, and that we can make it easier or harder for each other at any age. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashton. These are very strong remarks, and you've definitely given us a lot of food for the thought. It's important that we keep in mind that change starts at an individual level, and we need to wash our thoughts and attitudes from those negative messages that divide us. I like what you said about remaking our attitudes and breaking our habits in order to foster that cross-generational solidarity between all the different ages. Now we move to Nauman. And Nauman, from your experience in India, what are some of the main barriers in raising awareness and combating ageism in a community? And how could intergenerational approaches help us to overcome some of those challenges and foster solidarity across all age groups?
Thank you for the question. I think I would like to pick up where Ashton left off and answer first by saying that one of the major issues that prevents different generations from coming together and tackling these problems is culture and social stigma. In my country, especially India being a developing country, there's a great deal of uncertainty and a lot of pointing fingers when different groups decide to get involved in public discourse. And of course, when I talk about this, I will talk about this more from the perspective of being a young person. But the way in which I understand it is, in my country, whenever there is a popular protest movement or a national dialogue about a new piece of legislation or some sort of fraught political situation or social situation, young people are often accused of not being entitled, not accused of, but told that they are not entitled to have an opinion. They're told that they're susceptible to be influenced by foreign forces, and they are misled by the wrong kind of ideas because they have some sort of revolutionary panache under the surface. And what ends up happening is that political conversations or conversations about important subjects, agriculture, citizenship laws, healthcare, get skewed by ad hominem attacks that are just based on people's identities. In this case, people's identity defined by age. I'll give you an example, which is pretty close to me. During the year 2019, India's government passed a very controversial Citizenship Act, which sought to define citizenship on religious grounds. And there was a massive nationwide protest movement against this. And a lot of young people were put in jail and continue to be in jail almost 2 years later without having undergone trials under a fairly draconian law that was passed. And all of these are young people who went to leading universities, who study history and political affairs and the sciences. And the argument that's made is that these people are misled by ideas that exist in the broader global realm, and they're not mature enough to understand what the country needs for national growth, for national development. And therefore, they're not mature enough to participate in discussions around these important subjects. Whereas it was fairly clear, if you looked at the text of the law they were protesting against, that opinion was correct. So how can intergenerational approaches be used to tackle things like this? Really quickly, I think representation, dialogue, research, collaboration, these are the 4 things that I would like to touch upon. Maybe I'll get to this later. I will recount an example of a program that has been set up in association with India's parliament that is trying to work on some of these measures, something that I took part in as well, wherein young people are being placed in the offices of legislators at the very highest national level and are being given the opportunity to influence policy, to influence conversations at the national level with their research and with their experiences, so that their perspectives are factored into national conversation and dialogue.
Thank you, Nauman. And this is very important to keep in mind. And unfortunately, as young people, we keep being tokenized and hear those sentences that we're not mature enough, not experienced enough, or it's not our time yet. But as young people, we need to keep fighting because we are the leaders of today, not tomorrow. And such programs that promote those leadership skills and support young people to be in the places that they can be most contributing and impactful are very beneficial and fruitful for societies and for people from all different ages. Now we move to Gabrielle. Gabrielle, from your research background and your experience in Brazil, how important it is to build those shared spaces to promote intergenerational and immersive experiences in local communities?
Thank you, Bato. I think it's extremely important for the field that I work on, which is climate and environmental justice, which is a field that is being known from the intergenerational perspective when tackling the impacts of climate change and urban planning. I think in Brazil, I can give you some examples. We have trade unions starting to build intergenerational spaces to discuss their rights in a scenario that aims the transition from fossil fuels towards a sustainable economy that leaves no one behind. And youth has an important role in that, in this conversation, because climate change impacts us all and we will inherit unhealthy jobs if we do nothing to stop it. And we also have examples in Black communities. As at CIPO, we are currently working with Lab Jaca, which is an organization focused on the production of data from the favela to the favelas in Rio de Janeiro. And together we've been producing a series of videos about climate racism. And so far we have interviewed people from different backgrounds and different ages. And I think it's really important because we are starting to build dialogues around how public policies are impacted. How can we build public policies with quality? And the way we need, like in this way, we need inputs from all groups and we must hear them. And since it's electoral year here in Brazil, intergenerational approaches like this are contributing to raise awareness of a candidate's proposal. And I think most importantly, we are contributing to build critical thinking in this time of elections. So I think this intergenerational and shared spaces are essential to climate justice. And I echo what Norman said, it's essential to build cooperation around public policies.
Thank you, Gabrielle, for this powerful example. And specifically when it comes to climate change, as you said, we will be the people living with the consequences of the decisions that are made today, and those spaces that promote meaningful youth participation and at the same time promote solidarity and collaboration between the different ages. That will help us have a better outcome and better plans and better actions when it comes to climate justice. We've heard those wonderful examples from Brazil and from India about those spaces that are supporting and empowering young people and promoting intergenerational solidarity and collaboration between the different age groups. But now I want to circle back to you, Ashton, and you talked about the importance of changing at an individual level and the importance of building intergenerational solidarity to combat ageism. Yet often ageism is not only associated with older persons. What kind of initiatives do you believe have the most potential to address this misconception about ageism and strengthen unity across the different age groups?
Well, Western society is very youth-oriented and commodified. You know, youth is commodified, so older people do experience more age discrimination, I would say. But ageism is any judgment about a person or a group of people based on how old we think they are, like Numan described, like, oh, you younger people, what could you possibly know? They could know a lot. And we experience it any time someone says you're too old to help or too young. So younger people do experience a lot of it, and that's really important. That's why the hashtag for the World Health Organization's global campaign against ageism, which you referenced at the beginning, is a world for all ages. In the big picture, like all discrimination, ageism is profitable because it divides us and it makes people at both ends of the age spectrum easier to take advantage of. Both ends are, disadvantaged. And of course, pitting groups against each other, whether it's low-wage workers or, old against young, is a time-honored tactic to divide people, divide and conquer, that might otherwise join forces and challenge the status quo. In the workplace, it allows employers to replace older workers with cheaper, younger workers and allow that to keep overall wages low, so everyone suffers. Ageism in the workplace is not a too many old people problem. It is a disposable human problem. And the humans, very young and very old ones, are the most disposable. You hear this around healthcare rationing, terrifyingly at the beginning of the pandemic. Why should we spend money on old people when we could spend it on young ones? Again, zooming out, it is not ethical or legal to allocate resources by race or by sex, and it is equally unacceptable to pit the interests of the old against the young, period. Everyone has younger and older people we care about, and as we heard from Numan and from Gabrielle, we need all ages, everyone on deck to collaborate on massive issues like global inequality and climate justice. And of course, it also doesn't make any sense, not that any kind of prejudice makes sense, but to think in terms of old versus young, because communities that are good to grow old in, which means they have transportation and they're safe and they have public spaces and benches you can sit down on, are good for everyone, for families, for kids, for commuters. They are all age friendly. And because everyone ages and ageism is the one form of bias everyone encounters, we need to educate people about it and how to dismantle it. So that's why two colleagues and I created a website called Old School The website is oldschool.info, which has hundreds of vetted, carefully looked after, curated resources, videos, animations, workshops, tools, podcasts about every aspect of ageism, from tokenizing youth to, you can find the World Health Organization's terrific campaign there that Batul referred to at the beginning of this session. So oldschool.info, look around, find what fits you and your interests. We have most of the stuff in English, but we're getting more things translated. If anyone wants something extra to do to advance the movement, it would be great to get things translated into more languages. And we also host weekly and quarterly convenings. So just sign up for the newsletter and find out how and when to meet other people who are doing this work. And, to state the obvious, but I think we can't say it enough, everyone is old or future old. And until we put a stop to it, ageism will oppress us all. That makes it a perfect target for collective advocacy. And of course, when we make the world better to grow old in, we make it a better place to be a woman, to have a disability, to be non-white, to be non-rich. So, it is all one struggle. And by joining any struggle for equal rights, we dismantle ageism in the process, especially if we make sure that older and younger people are at the table and in the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashton. I could not agree more. It's definitely not an old versus a young person problem. It's way more complicated than that, and it's something that is there to divide and affect all different ages. And addressing ageism will definitely help us address other discriminatory issues we find in our societies. Going back to you, Noman, from your experience as a policy researcher and a political advocate, what kind of intergenerational communication is needed to change the social attitudes and the stigmas to prevent them from influencing policymaking in India and beyond?
Yeah, sure. To answer that, I think once again, I'd like to pick up from something that Ashton was saying, which was that I think the root cause of a lot of ageism that we see, that I have seen in India and in other parts of the world when I've traveled for work and so on and so forth, in say the Arab world or in other parts of Asia, what I have noticed is that it stems from the fact that human beings are seen as units of economic productivity. And that's the argument that you were making, Ashton, about how, say, during the pandemic, healthcare systems were prioritizing treating young people over old people. It's because young people are seen as being able to contribute to an economy for 4 decades. And that period is probably gone for older people. And in India, this is a major problem because, and I've said this a lot of times before when I've spoken to people, we're the country with the largest young population in the world. We have roughly 500 million people under the age of 30. That's more than the population of any other country in the world other than China and India. And at one end of the spectrum, you have not enough opportunities being created in employment for young people like myself. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have not enough of a conversation about creating, say, accessible public spaces for older people to be able to live comfortable lives. And all of this is a result of that same conception of human beings as simple economic units. The problem is that conversations and institutions that are supposed to solve these problems, governments, parliaments, think tanks, research organizations, are too busy, caught up in politics, in often politics of ageism, something that I touched upon when I spoke the first time, in throwing ad hominem attacks at each other and saying that you're wrong because you're not entitled to have a say. And I would say, in terms of solutions, the best way in which to approach this, and I said 4 things the last time as well, is research, collaboration, and engagement between these different communities, and also representation and dialogue. So in my experience, young people do not have enough political representation in my country and in many other parts of the world. One big way in which this can change is reforming representation laws at national levels to allow younger people to enter legislative bodies and have conversations with older, more experienced politicians so that there is a common consensus on how to tackle various problems at a national level. Another way, and this is something that I would like to wrap up with, is a programs of the sort that India's legislative assistant to member of parliament fellowship take up, which is basically a program where young people are placed in the offices of parliamentarians and told, hey, you work here for a year, you conduct your research, you go onto the ground, you conduct grassroots assessments, you conduct surveys, you talk to people, you figure out what different kinds of people, different communities, backgrounds, genders, ages are talking about, and bring that to members of parliament so they can bring this up in national level policy conversations. And I think those are the kind of approaches that could be replicated in other countries and to great effect, because in my experience in India, this program and similar programs of this sort have been able to create some headway in unlocking intergenerational solidarities towards a better society.
Thank you, Norman. And this is such an important point that we need to keep in mind, the ability of young people actually to represent their communities and to address the challenges they face and to defend their rights and address the issues that they need to do through policy making. Unfortunately, we see in a lot of countries there's an age limit to joining the parliament, while we hear in many other countries young people who are ministers and leading government groups and so on. This discrepancy, I think, that we're talking about, we need to empower the younger generation to work with the other generations all together to promote that solidarity, to learn from each other's experiences, and to all have a seat at the table, an equal seat at the table. And Gabrielle, we move back to you, and as a young researcher interested in the intersection of different, let's say, isms, such as ageisms and other areas as well, can you please share your thoughts? How could we improve data and research to gain a better understanding of ageism, particularly against young people?
Sure, thank you for the question. And well, I think I'll try to add a bit of what Newman and Ashton said, because I echo all the aspects that they pointed out, especially when talking about cooperation. I think that to better understand ageism, especially in the global South, for example, we have to understand the high inequalities, racism, and unemployment, and gender violence, and the lack of opportunities that many young people have to deal with on a daily basis. As we've discussed it here, we're often seen or as a token or as a cheap employee. So it's all about seeing data and also ageism through these lenses. And I believe that a way to improve research about the global South, for example, and how ageism operates in it, is inviting people from the global South as partners, and of course from different experiences. I've been to many events, I think, where northern countries are discussing alone issues that happen in a local community in the middle of Brazil, when a young indigenous leader could have been invited, and I'm certain he would be really happy to share the knowledge and build together in cooperation. So I think that I see cooperation as a way to reduce ageism, because we have a lot to learn, but we also have a lot to contribute. And especially when talking about the different isms as racism and sexism in Brazil, these are very intersectional things that we have to discuss here, because I think Global South is also really tokenized in these discussions. And we are often faced with helicopter research, which is a term that I recently learned. And it really applies to us when researchers come from different parts of the world just to see and not to discuss with us together. So I think that's a way to tackle ageism, especially against youth, is, as Newman said and as Ashton said, building together like inviting us as partners, not only as objects of research.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Young people should be looked at as partners rather than just allies or a voice or a group to be consulted, but as an equal stakeholder and partner to implement change. And we've heard different aspects from the panelists today about how we can create that intergenerational solidarity. And also I'd like to give you the floor as well, if you would like to comment on any of the other points that were shared by the other panelists about the different topics we spoke about. Changing attitudes, creating those intergenerational spaces, and addressing ageism as an issue that affects both young and old people. So I'll just give the floor for each one of you to add just final remarks if you did not share your full message, if there's anything else you think that can contribute to our discussion of how we can address ageism as an intergenerational issue and that needs an intergenerational solidarity. I'll start with you, Norman. Would you like to add anything?
Sure. I think if I were to end on a light note, if there's one thing that could be changed, and I've spoken a lot about political representation today, in terms of cultural symbols and how people envision their leaders around the world. If you think about the stock image of a world leader that is put up in a high school political science textbook, it's usually a relatively old man wearing a suit and tie. I think change alongside our individual attitudes has to start at that level. It needs to begin with changing those images, those pictures, those photographs need to become more diverse. You have to have people young and old, different colors, different genders, different backgrounds, being envisioned as leaders so that not only those of us who are having this conversation today, but the children of tomorrow realize that anyone can be a leader. You don't have to be an old white man to be a leader. And I think that is the beginning of some kind of change, in my opinion.
Thank you, Norman. Gabrielle?
Well, since it's electoral year here in Brazil, I think my final message has to be towards that. And I think we have to pay a lot of attention on our candidates and how they are proposing discussions with youth and other age groups. Because currently we have a president that doesn't care about youth representation or youth leaders. And he actually diminishes our role in society. So I think it's important for all countries when it's electoral period, and not only that, but to demand accountability and also demand public spaces where things and discussions like this can be proposed.
I'll be very quick because older people do too much talking. There isn't enough representation of younger people. There's a quote from a African-American scholar named Amos Wilson that says, if you want to understand any problem, and he says in America, but I think it's true everywhere that global capitalism has reached, which is pretty much everywhere, don't look at who suffers from it, look at who profits from it. Let's zoom out and see these bigger issues and just make sure, as Gabrielle said, that the people who are affected by this, whether they are young people with disabilities or older Brazilians, have a seat at the table and a microphone.
Thank you so much. For all of you, this has been actually amazing to hear all of those different experiences and suggestions and solutions to combat ageism as an issue that affects all ages. To wrap things up, maybe I'd like to share three key takeaways that I got myself from what I heard from those amazing panelists today, which is to start with, we need to change at an individual level to rethink our attitudes against all ages and to address our own biases. we need to promote the second message, we need to promote intergenerational solidarity by creating spaces that promote collaboration between all age groups and immersive experiences. Those spaces should have equal representation and collaboration between the different age groups. And the final message is a message of hope that actually, as the panelists mentioned on a couple of occasions in the discussion, addressing ageism will help us address other discriminatory isms that affect all the different age groups. So addressing ageism gives us a hope that we can address all the other issues that face the different age groups together. Thank you all for participating today and for your wonderful remarks and solutions to address ageism on International Youth Day.
Thank you, Batul, and thank you to all our panelists for helping us to better understand how we as individuals and members of society can start to combat ageism and make a difference. Finally, let's explore a case study in the Gipuzkoa province of the Basque Country, an autonomous community located in Spain. This initiative, called Boost, focuses on incorporating intergenerational approaches and dialogue in a new collaborative governance model.
Kaixo, ongitorri, I'm Imanol Asa, and thank you very much for having me.
Here I am to tell you about the Boost initiative by the Provincial Council of Gipuzkoa. But first of all, let me share with you some figures to tell you who we are and where are we located in Europe. Gipuzkoa is one of the provinces in the Basque Country between France and Spain. 720,000 inhabitants, men and women, with a very strong, solid industrial economy, where also social economy is highly relevant in terms of our GDP. We have social policies and a very important social protection system because we do not want to leave anybody behind. With more than 100% of our geography covered by forests, and also with our own language, Basque language, Euskera, which implies that we have our own personal identity in Europe. These are some of the figures to talk about Gipuzkoa and the Basque Country, our region. But here in Gipuzkoa, we have launched a model, a different governance model, which has its own characteristics which are being studied in Europe. Etorkizuna Eraikis, it's an open and collaborative model, the goal of which is to give replies to the questions of the future, but hand in hand together with social, economic stakeholders, and also hand in hand with citizens. And that is why we want to promote a governance model that has already been launching different initiatives, once again aiming at replying to issues such as how are we going to be taking care of the elderly, or what about mobility, taking into account hydrogen, electrical, or cars and buses in the territory of Gipuzkoa. Climate change and its consequences is something that we are also working around. We have strategic projects. We also have a think tank where we also want to reply to these questions. We also want to identify actions. A very special think tank integrated by more than 100 people coming from Gipuzkoa. And we are also working on experimental projects. Etorkizuna Eraikis is a governance model that seeks to reply to these issues which are going to be important for the future. And among them, let me tell you about Boost. Boost is an initiative that aims at replying to these different issues which are on our agendas. We want to identify and detect the trends important in the future. We want to discuss, build, construct the future all together with our community, with this strong community such as ours in Gipuzkoa. And to do so, we have launched this initiative. And once again, the goal is to connect and engage young people. And something essential is intergenerational dialogue. Older and young people working together, sitting together around the same table so as to think about the future, How do we want to work? How are we going to be protecting those who are going through a difficult situation? Because the struggle against social inequalities is our most important task here in Gipuzkoa. And that is why we have Etorkizuna. It raises some 5 questions. How are we going to be governing in the future? How are we going to be facing climate change? How are we going to be taking care of the elderly? What about our economy? And once again, inequalities. How to struggle and fight against equalities as a challenge. And to do so, we have been thinking about 5 initiatives and 5 meetings. We need to be able to ask the right questions so as to obtain the right answers. In this moment of uncertainty, let's talk about this Boost initiative. Let's watch a video first.
Don't grow up. It's a trap. The paradigm has changed. Pandemic, war, inequality, doubts, misinformation, uncertainty. No one prepared you for this. Internet is changing. Your beliefs, society, welfare, economy, identity, reality. What is happening? But above all, what is going to happen? To grow is to doubt. To seek answers that are no longer yes or no, black or white, all or nothing. To grow up is to ask questions before anyone else answers them for you. And what if you don't know the answers? What if they're not the right ones? The important thing is to ask the questions no matter how uncomfortable they may be. It is more comfortable to keep scrolling, but the future keeps asking us questions. What are we going to answer?
The first working sessions have already taken place. Men and women, older and younger people, in this intergenerational dialogue, sitting around the same table to reply to these difficult and hard questions sometimes, but which are so very important in terms of building the future for Gipuzkoa. You will also see that how we have come up with conclusions is quite innovative and different, because we are using videos which are very similar to those TikTok videos. Let's watch an example.
For the first time in history, the younger generations will not have better economic conditions than our mothers or fathers. Pensions, the welfare state, the future. How we are going to live when we get older?
Boomers, millennials, centennials, Generation X, Y or Z, it doesn't matter which tribe we belong to. In the future, we are going to have to integrate more to solve common problems. The future is intergenerational.
Younger tribes prefer a policy that does to a policy that only talks. We prefer actions to words. Opinion makers are boring.
Either politics connect with millennials, or millennials will end up entering politics by force.
We trust individuals more than institutions. We care more about people and their values than about the acronym they represent. We don't want promises. We want what is promised to be fulfilled.
They're going to live when we get older.
Last but not least, I would like to invite you to come to Gipuzkoa, to the Basque Country. Come and visit us, get to know us, verify, please, how are we working towards the future, betting in favor of a new governance model. We have our own political and institutional agenda for the future, where all the voices and opinions have to be heard. That is key, that is essential if we want to combat populisms and if we want to succeed and finally obtain a balanced and fair society. That is why we all together have to fight against social inequalities, having a sound, solid economy, and of course, having a sound social policy system. Thank you very much to all of you. You know where we are? Here I am at your disposal.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed that final case study. Before concluding today's event, I'd like to pass the floor to Ms. Daniela Bass, Director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, to provide some closing reflections and remarks.
Dear all, in my role as the director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development, DISD, in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA, I'm really glad to celebrate with you all the official commemoration of the International Youth Day under the theme Intergenerational Solidarity, Creating a World for All Ages. Youth is very important to us, since the division I have the honor to lead for the department, DESA, is the focal point on this social group. Now, assuming that young people are computer geniuses and older people are technologically inept, praising older persons by comparing them to younger ones like, oh, you look good for your age. You are young at heart, or inside I feel 30 years younger, which is true in my case, or you are still dancing, driving, going to the gym, wearing a particular style. Well, you are too old to do these things. I'm quite sure that you have heard these sentences now and then. And this is ageism. So allow me to sum up. Ageism is a stereotyping and or a discrimination against individuals or groups on the basis of their age. And it is also used to describe the oppression of younger people by older people. And I'm sure you have heard these expressions, as I mentioned earlier on. Now, in the UK, Councillor Richard Thomas, at a meeting of Bracknell Forest Council, I believe, to recall, in 1983, pointed out that age discrimination works against younger as well as older people. And in the early 20s of this century, ageism has been used in regards to prejudices and discrimination, particularly against adolescents and the children. How? Well, let me give you a couple of examples, although we have went through these throughout the workshop today. By denying adolescents the certain rights and privileges usually reserved for adults, such as the right to vote, run for political office, consent or refuse medical treatment, sign contracts, and so on. And one of the areas that affects most youth is definitely unemployment, SDG 8 of the 2030 Agenda. Too young, too old, too much experience, too little experience, etc. And paradoxically, what most companies do not seem to understand is that older workers possess a depth of knowledge and experience that is really worth paying for, and it is not easily replaced. And paradoxically, most companies use a screening algorithm that will automatically disqualify you because of your age. I myself had to go through all of this when I was your age. And on the top of that, I also have a physical disability, so imagine. So when it comes to employment, many have the belief that young people are inexperienced and needed to get a foot on the labor market at any cost. And this assumption, which may have some logic behind it, it can actually have a traumatic effect on young people's transition to independence and autonomy. See, when young people are offered a job to gain valuable experience, often the lack of experience is used to justify unjust practices, such youth minimum wage because of their age, which, as the International Labour Organization indicates, this potentially conflicts with the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. Now, this year's theme seeks to raise awareness of ageism, and it highlights the importance of intergenerational approaches in ensuring all voices are included, recognized, and meaningfully engaged in advancing the 2030 Agenda to leave no one behind. And we have heard repeatedly throughout today's webinar, ageism is an issue that affects all ages, and therefore we must all work together to end it. we kicked off the day with a presentation by the World Health Organization and the Global Report on Ageism, on which DESA worked closely with the WHO, along with the UNFPA and OHCHR, and I really invite you to read it. Then we had in panel 1, the exploration on how ageism can manifest in all spheres of life, from political to employment to health and so on. And I personally found particularly impactful to see younger and older panelists find a common ground while describing their own experiences of ageism and envisioning what a world without ageism might look like. Then we shifted gears to explore solutions and discuss more concretely how we can move from ageism to intergenerational solidarity in panel 2. And during our time together, we also saw several real-world examples of intergenerational initiatives, building solidarity across age groups and advancing the 2030 Agenda. In conclusion, while the International Youth Day is just a single day, I encourage you to continue this important conversation around ageism and intergenerational solidarity. Let's work together towards a world for all ages, one in which age-based stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination have no place. I count on you. Thank you.